want to welcome you to the Ask Jeff YouTube channel. Here's today's question. Man was created as man. There are fossils of, quote, almost men that paleontologists consider part of an evolutionary path to man. What were those animals and or beings? Now, this is one of those questions that if you submitted it, let me encourage you to do so on a Wednesday night as well. This is one of those questions we could go 20, 30, or maybe even 60 minutes on because you're dealing with so many different kinds of constructs. But at the end of the day, in a very brief time that we have here on YouTube, how do we address this question of the biblical record of God establishing man at one time from the dust of the earth and breathing life into him, and this evolutionary paleontology record of, quote, pseudo-man, almost man, Neanderthal man? How do we reconcile those things? Well, I think the easiest and or best way to do so is just to let the facts be the facts. You say, well, what do you mean the facts be the facts? If you'll go and do an honest, objective investigation of the quote-unquote fossil records in regard to this question, you will discover that the overwhelming majority of these, quote, half man, almost man, either A, are fakes, or B, complete isolation. Let me extrapolate that per today's question. Many findings of the quote-unquote paleontology scientific community of a head or a limb that shows this Neanderthal almost man, 20, 30 years later, by the time the story has already been published and put in the archives, finds out it was falsified, that they were faking it to get grant dollars or whatever. In fact, most of these discoveries end up being such. But what about the ones that are authentic? What do you do with these fossil records that appear to show this quote-unquote evolutionary process? I think this is where we get into what I call the outliers. You see, the outliers, well, statistically, that means something that is completely outside of the realm of the normal observation. So let's think back in time, not necessarily to the 21st century, of how humanity responded when somebody was born with either a birth defect, born maybe a little bit different, they were strange, they were odd. What did humanity do? They isolated them. Now think about this biblically. What happens when someone came down with leprosy? They put them in a separate colony. What did the Lord say in Leviticus about offering sacrifices to the Lord? That people that had physical infirmities were not allowed to do so. The priests had to have all the limbs and all the right ways. And you have this historical record that when maybe somebody was born a little bit different, or what we might call a birth defect, they actually isolated them out from the larger community. Why is that important to the question? Because oftentimes archaeologists come upon a village where there's hundreds of bodies that have been buried. And guess what? They all look like you and I. Anytime they find one of these odd fossils, they're always out in the middle of nowhere, separated from the community. So, therefore, if they're not fake, if they're truly genuine, I think it's the outlier and not the norm, thus solidifying the biblical record. Again, science and scripture not in conflict, but complementary when we just kind of take a step back and say, what does the evidence really point to? Great question. If you have one, send it to askjeff.net. Maybe your question will be tomorrow. Thanks for being a part of today's daily question. Now, we answer a question each and every day. Please feel free to submit a new question at askjeff.net. We may not have gotten to yours today, but we eventually will continue to be a part of this. Subscribe so you don't miss out on a question every day.